I want to take a few moments to thank Congresswoman Stephanie Bice for agreeing to speak to our RNT Cyber Ethics Conference this year. Congresswoman Bice is a fourth-generation Oklahoman, born and raised in Oklahoma's 5th Congressional District. She graduated from Oklahoma State University in 1995 with a marketing and international business degree. Prior to her election to Congress, Ms. Bice served as the Oklahoma State Senate for 6 years. During her tenure, she was the Assistant Majority Floor Leader and Chair of the Senate Finance Committee. Before her public service, Bice worked in the private sector for 8 years in financial oversight, business strategy, and marketing for her family's technology company. In addition, she ran her own marketing company and later helped lead a boutique digital marketing agency as the Vice President of Business Development. Oklahoma's 5th Congressional District includes all parts of Oklahoma, Pottawatomie, and Seminole counties. In the House of Representatives, Bice was elected by her peers to serve as the freshman class president and serves as a member of the Republican whip team. Stephanie, her husband, Jeffrey, have 2 daughters and are members of St. Eugene's Catholic Church. We are excited to welcome her here to our conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be here and give a little bit of perspective on what's happening in Washington and really how I can be of service to your community. As a member, let me first start out by saying I was very excited to be placed on the House Armed Services Committee, as well as the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. And 2 subcommittees on that are oversight for SST and actually cyber, which is a new subcommittee that the House Armed Services Committee created. And as a member of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee on HASC, I'm focused on ensuring that the nation is able to defend itself from all adversaries and that we're able to go on the offense against our nation's enemies should the need arise. We know we find ourselves at a critical crossroad right now. We face thousands of cyber attacks on a daily basis, and security protocols that we once thought to be ironclad have been exposed to be incredibly vulnerable, which is why it is imperative that we look at every possible solution to protect our networks, internal and external websites, and software applications from security breaches. You know, in fact, the SolarWinds breach, which was exposed late last year, showed just how vulnerable our nation's systems really are. And the attack has been an impetus for reinvigorated focus on cybersecurity here in Congress. Interestingly enough, SolarWinds is back in the news yesterday as Microsoft has warned that at least 140 resellers and technology service providers in global IT supply chains have been targeted in a new wave of activity. You know, I was just elected this last year, but I wanted to learn as much as I could about our government's cybersecurity strategy, which is why I was eager to read the Cyberspace Solarium Commission's report on improvements we should be looking at to protect valuable U.S. assets. The report contained over 80 recommendations, and so far about 25 have been codified into law. And speaking of improvements, I authored an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act that passed that'll prioritize $3 million to strengthen the cybersecurity of the industrial control systems, or ICS, through experimentation. Many large programs in the defense industrial base utilize ICS, and securing these systems against foreign intrusions is a high priority. In my home state of Oklahoma, Tulsa University is heavily involved in this type of research and would be well positioned to participate in such an experiment. I also offered an amendment to the NDAA to require the DoD to evaluate the efficacy of integrating artificial intelligence and machine learning systems into the DoD contracting process. The goal here is offering it with this amendment is to move the DoD in a direction that can speed up the contracting process, find new efficiencies, and lead to better outcomes for the DoD and for taxpayers. One of the things I've learned very quickly is that the contracting process is so lengthy. By the time a purchase is approved, the technology could be in some cases completely obsolete. And last, I'm a co-sponsor of and working closely with several of my colleagues to advance HR 4818, which creates the National Digital Reserve Corps. It would allow for highly skilled individuals in the private sector to serve our nation in times of crisis without having to give up their day job. It's sort of similar to the National Guard, and we think that in today's day and age that a National Digital Reserve Corps will be incredibly helpful. I hope to continue to look at ways that we can improve our cybersecurity posture. In addition to focusing on the DoD, there's also been a focus on cyber threat information sharing in order to help thwart ransomware attacks, which have harmed all sectors of America society, including school districts, municipalities, and certainly small businesses and large ones. Just earlier this year, a constituent health system of mine in Oklahoma City faced a severe ransomware attack. And other municipal governments in my home state, including the city of Tulsa, have faced similar. It is clear to me that much needs to be done to address the growing threats that we face. And I look forward to hearing more from you all on what actions you think Congress could take to address this important issue. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm happy to open it up to questions.
Well, we do have a question from Lieutenant Colonel Aniela Szymanski. Wow, 2 questions. One is that privacy is such an important issue for consumers now. What can we do as cyber professionals to ensure that consumer privacy is protected?
You know, I don't really think that individuals recognize how much of their information is being shared, whether it is on social media platforms, whether it is on search engines when you are looking up terms. You know, those types of things lend themselves to data collection, and data collection on an individual reveals a tremendous amount of information. A quick sort of side story that I think you all will find interesting. Artificial intelligence and really data analytics can tell you a lot about what's happening. And several years ago, there was a story floating around that a high schooler started getting mail from local businesses in her community about being a new mother and pregnancy. And her father went to her and said, you know, what is this? Why in the world would you be getting on all this information? And she unfortunately shared with her father that she found out that she was unexpectedly pregnant. So searching for all of those terms on the internet yielded the ability for, you know, large data collection to target her through mail and other avenues. This type of information, I don't think that people really recognize what's happening. And so I think that making the public aware, more aware of the type of information that's being collected when you do these searches, you know, many of us have seen where the pop-up box comes up and it says, you know, enable cookies. I don't think people really understand what's going on there. So educating people on really what information is being tracked and then limiting it, allowing individuals to opt out and making it very clear up front. You do not want your information shared. Sort of like health information privacy. Why are we sharing all of these very, in some cases, intimate details with people that we're not even realizing we're sharing it with? Those are important aspects, I think, of protecting individuals' privacy.
Wow. Wow, very insightful. Next question we have, same source. Will the Data Reserve Corps address the problem recently brought to light that the U.S. is way behind China in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest concerns and one of the needs for this cyber corps. You know, many of these individuals will not work for the public sector. You know, money speaks, right? And when you've spent years honing a craft to understand and be able to be an expert in this particular field, you know, you're being paid handsomely by large corporations, and rightly so. But that same sort of knowledge is incredibly, you know, valuable to the United States government. And so allowing a digital corps to partner, you know, really partner with private sector and allow these individuals to take a couple of months off, help us develop new cyber strategies, try to prevent these types of cyber crimes that we've been seeing, I think would be a huge help. And certainly ensuring that we compete with China when it comes to the cyberspace is very important. I've only been here a few, 10 short months, but in my opinion, this is the future. When we talk about conflict or war, it's not necessarily boots on the ground or even air or naval. In my mind, the cyberspace is really where I fear for the next conflict across the world.
We've heard for years now that World War V is in progress, and it's all being conducted in cyberspace. I was really excited to hear about the industrial control systems, and I don't know if you see the question from Kevin Owens.
Let me see if I can.
Kevin is an ICS cybersecurity SME subject matter expert. He's heavily involved with the water infrastructure, water treatment, wastewater treatment, and he's on the standards board for that particular sector. And I don't want to throw too much limelight on Kevin right now, but I love his question.
Well, I can ask it out loud if you want.
Thank you.
So today's news, the UK, MI5, MI6, and GCHQ started or announced they're contracting Amazon to store classified information in the Amazon cloud, especially their offensive capabilities. And they plan on using the Amazon AI to analyze data. And my question is, could this lead to possible problems and potential compromise of classified capabilities, having that information in the news and telling everybody where to target?
Yeah, I'm not sure that was probably the brightest idea in the world. But candidly, I think you know this better than anyone, that Amazon and all of these cloud-based services are being, infiltrated every minute of every day, trying to, breach them. SolarWinds is a great example, although SolarWinds did it in a very unusual way, using sort of an application rather than attacking the platform itself. I think that Amazon is doing really a remarkable job of trying to highlight that they have the ability to store this information. There are a lot of other companies out there that are providing these cloud-based services. And what I will tell you is my biggest concern from a government perspective is the government building out their own, the mill cloud or whatever sort of platform. Because what I've recognized, again, in my very short time is we are now 3 years into Mill Cloud, and only a few agencies have actually migrated over to it. It is such a long, lengthy process that by the time you get to onboarding these agencies, I fear that the technology is actually outdated. So utilizing an Amazon or maybe a Microsoft or, General Dynamics, whoever you want to look at that can build out a robust and incredibly secure classified storage facility, I think is something that should be considered. You may not want to publicize it, though. It's a great question.
And Randy Roberts. Randy Roberts is in Tulsa, that area. Randy, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, sure. I hope you can hear me. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for being here today, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question goes back to the SolarWinds hack. I mean, we all know if you had implemented the basic security controls that SolarWinds recommended, the attack would have had no impact on your network. And my concern is everybody's running around going SolarWinds, SolarWinds, SolarWinds. It's like, well, there's 300, 400, 500 other pieces of software in most environments, all of which have the same kind of issues. And yet if you follow the basic security protocols that we do at the network layer, none of that would have had any difference because the outbound communications would have been blocked. And yet I keep seeing Congress want to do all this, fancy stuff, but it's like, hey, how about we hold people's feet to the fire for the basics? Because those basics have a huge impact.
Yeah, I think that, you really bring up a great point. We saw this actually, it was mentioned earlier that I was elected to the Oklahoma State Senate in 2015. And we saw the same situation on the state level. And what ended up happening is the state decided to take over all of the agency infrastructure, network infrastructure, because the agencies, especially smaller ones, weren't doing their due diligence in basic network upkeep. So updating your firmware, updating software, or doing software updates, checking security protocols, stuff that should be done on a very regular basis. And so I think you're right. We need to be mindful of the fact that these things need to happen on a, very regular basis, and people need to be held accountable for that. Now, that being said, you're not going to catch everything, but I think to your point, you're going to probably be able to prevent a lot more than you would if you're spending, 6 months in a open environment where you failed to update your software and end up being hacked. I actually get updates on my iPhone or on my email pretty regularly. Go update your iPhone software. Go update your iPad software, because they're trying to prevent intrusions. And so I think you bring up a great point. Some of it is just reminding folks that they have to do their due diligence.
That is so true. We've been talking at the last, I think this is day 2, about the importance of training, and we've learned about training for the general public. We've learned about training for employees. We've learned about, also we're talking about training people in the elementary school level on effective use of the best way to train people. And I know, again, I don't want to throw Randy Roberts under the bus here, but he's working diligently to pull together training in Oklahoma for the K-12 crowd.
Well, and let me just also add, I was part of a group for about a year that was really looking at updating our sort of computer crimes laws in Oklahoma, because what we recognized is that they're unbelievably generic and broad. And they were written back in the 80s. Now, there's something to be said for being, broad, because you can really, prosecute crimes in that way. But a lot of the conversation in those meetings stemmed around employee theft. So someone puts a thumb drive in, steals a bunch of information. How do you protect and prevent those type of attacks? Internal attacks, I think, was more. And then on the flip side of that, many businesses are multinational and or do, have relationships with countries across the world. How do you ensure that your accounts payable department doesn't see an email asking for a wire transfer because an invoice is past due, and somebody doesn't do their due diligence to check it, to verify, and they pay an invoice to a criminal, in an Eastern European country? A lot of this is education, and educating even your, you mentioned teachers, educators. Don't click on an email attachment if you have a concern that it could be, some sort of hack. Education is key.
It looks like Vince has a question. Vince, do you want to ask it? Where'd he go?
Yeah, Congressman Bice, with respect to the coronavirus, and you may or may not have this answer, what effect does it have on moving regulation and laws with respect to cybersecurity?
I think you have seen a slowdown, and also maybe not so much of a focus as there needs to be on cyber regulations and laws, which is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to be part of the committee, is to highlight that, to explain why it's so important, and really to advocate for ensuring that we're protecting our nation's security platforms. From a coronavirus perspective, I think the biggest challenge has been third party or primes that may have been working on software applications that had to kind of either take a pause or have pushed those timelines because maybe folks were not in the office for a while. They had people that, had been out sick or taking care of family. So some of those timelines have slipped. And I think that's a concern that I have, is we need to make sure that we're getting back on board with those timelines, because every day that goes by is one more day closer to us being behind the 8 ball. And it was mentioned earlier that we're competing with our adversaries, Russia and China being, the main primary threats. My fear is that if we don't invest and we don't focus on this, that we are going to be falling farther and farther behind.
I have a question that's kind of out of left field, if you will. There are several of us on the call that work with the Defense Industrial Base, with the CMMC assessments and support, and we hear quite often, in fact, I don't think I've never heard, how am I supposed to pay for this? How am I supposed to, as a small business owner in Duncan, Oklahoma, how am I supposed to pay for $75,000 worth of infrastructure improvement? Why doesn't the government pay for it instead of, and I probably shouldn't even ask you that question, but do you know anything about funding small businesses that are in the Defense Industrial Base? And I don't know if that's a fair question to ask, but I thought I'd just throw it out there.
I haven't heard about any funding specific to that, but what I will tell you is that Congress is also very focused on making sure that we are removing any hardware from networks across the country that could be compromised, and specifically Huawei. You all probably are aware that the 5G and Huawei network infrastructure has some concerns, security concerns. And so we are looking specifically at rural broadband. As an interesting side note, that is really the world that my father's technology company was in for many years. I managed a GSA contract. I dealt with E-rate. So I actually saw these either small rural broadbands or even schools that were looking to upgrade their network infrastructure. And at the time, companies like Huawei were coming in and offering incredibly low prices because they knew that they could compete if they were offering, a cheaper rate compared to a Cisco or, Palo Alto or Aruba, whatever other Juniper manufacturer, US-based manufacturer. So I think there is a focus on removing that network hardware. But as far as actually funding hardware, the prices have come down significantly since, a decade ago when I was actually in the industry. And I would also say that the ability to access cloud through AWS or other online platforms brings those costs down. You're no longer required to have your own network set up and hire an IT supervisor to be able to manage that. Now you really have the ability to outsource that. And I think for smaller businesses, it's the right move. It's cost effective. They're going to be secure because someone else is managing that has the experience to do so. And it makes sense.
Good answer. Kevin's got another question having to do with funding the AWIA, the American Water Infrastructure Act regulations. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so I guess just tying on to Teresa's thing that she was just saying, the water sector, there were some recent regulations put down, so every community water system across the country that served more than 3,000 people had to be assessed for physical and cybersecurity as well as resiliency. And the difficulty is these very small cities, municipalities, don't have the funding to deal with some of these cybersecurity threats that they are being asked to address. So what are your thoughts on that? Because they're like, yeah, it's great that we have this regulation pushing us to do it, but how do we fix it? We don't have the money.
A lot of these municipalities, and I represented some of them in the state legislature, barely have enough resources to be able to keep their water infrastructure maintained or upgrade it when absolutely necessary, especially with those larger growing communities. So I empathize with the fact that now they're being asked to consider cybersecurity as part of their sort of infrastructure and don't have the funds to do so. It's actually such a great point. I'm going to make a note of it because I want to see if there's a way for us to provide some grant funding for these municipalities to be able to take care of that. The reality is I worry about water and I worry about electricity and the grid and being compromised. And so making sure that these entities have the resources to protect themselves is going to be really important. we offer them grant opportunities to buy a new water tower or, build a new water treatment facility, but we're not offering them the opportunity to make sure that the network infrastructure is secure, and it seems kind of counterintuitive.
Okay. I have a follow-up question, if I could.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to see your stance on what do you think about creating a new branch of the U.S. government to assess something like the water sector, to do something similar to the FERC for the energy sector, for the electric grid. Do you like that concept, or do you like the concept of self-regulation, something done by the industry themselves, where they charge like an annual dues, the larger cities paying a lot more, but then do self-regulation similar to like what the credit card industry does, self-regulation?
Just get you to clarify FERC for those of us on the call that aren't familiar with it.
The Federal Energy Reliability Council.
Thank
so
you.
These are the ones who are looking at all sorts of things regarding physical and cybersecurity for the electric grids, but mainly in the generation and transmission, not in the distribution part of the grid. So auditors come in and assess utilities and see if they are in compliance. And if they are not in compliance, they get fined.
Well, let me just say, I always believe that the private sector can do it better. Government oversight tends to, be more bureaucratic and have a lot of red tape attached to it. So I would much prefer, sort of a third party or an outside entity to be able to partner with these organizations to try to help them ensure that they're meeting their security needs and not relying on the government to make that happen.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Just curious, how can we get you on the Intelligence Committee?
Well, there's a lot of opportunities for the future. We'll just have to kind of see how things play out.
And she does need to sleep on occasion, Kevin.
Yeah, right now I'm part of, 2 full committees, 4 subcommittees, a select committee, and a task force. So it's a little busy up here.
Well,
you're doing a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If no one else has any other questions, I want to say thank you for this half hour of your time and all the great insights you've shared with us. We're all very interested in seeing how your support and enthusiasm will help make a huge difference in
well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great to interact with your members and get a perspective on what you all are sort of focused on. And certainly if there's things that you want me to look into or want me to know, feel free to reach out to my office anytime. You can find my website at bice.house.gov. The website was down last week, which makes me wonder, but we won't go there. Or you can also call my office and leave a message, and I'm happy to look into that information. But I appreciate your time this afternoon and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great day.